Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our stage. I have big shoes to fill, Mallory Erickson size shoes, which actually are not that big. But I'm very excited to be here with you all today, especially for this next session. It's going to be fantastic. It's called Accessible by Design, How AI Can Advance Equity for People with Disabilities. And we are so fortunate to have Ayan Kishore here from Benetech. Ayan is a social entrepreneur and a technology leader dedicated to advancing equity and access through innovation. As CEO of Benetech, he drives large-scale systems change to transform how people around the world read, learn, and work. Previously, Ayan founded a digital social innovation lab at Creative Associates International, co-led the IPO at Professional Diversity Network, and served as CEO of Career Imp. He holds a BSS in computer engineering from Georgia Tech and an MS in human computer interaction from Carnegie Mellon University. So obviously like a fantastic expert to have with us today, and I'm really looking forward to this session. So let's get Ayan up on the stage with us and kick me off.
Hello, folks. Thank you, Jen. Hope everyone can hear me all right. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to get started. So I'm excited about this session because not at in many conferences are we able to talk about inclusion and accessibility with the main discourse, and here we are. We are really here to talk about accessible by design, particularly how all the AI advances can really enable nonprofits to themselves better serve people with disabilities and forward innovation for those with disabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. There is a ton that I'd like to cover. I think you heard a little bit, Jen, about my sort of background in shops at Benetech and prior working at actually AI organizations pre-LLM days when AI was much harder to do things with. But I'm excited to be here today. Those who don't know about Benetech, we are a nonprofit focused on education for those with disabilities and neurodiversity, and we consider ourselves also an assistive technology organization. What we do is actually build and deploy tech-based solutions that can help those with neurodiversity, and disabilities to excel and learn and have better educational outcomes and better life outcomes. So that's what Benetech does. I will share a little bit about our core program, Bookshare, and all of that. But I really wanted to start off by saying that those who have disabilities know that assistive technology is life changing, right? It is crucial and critical. It enables them to be independent and learn and work and do things leisurely, just like any other folks would. And assistive technology has made that happen. And today we're living in a world in which actually AI is doing the same. It's sort of supercharging that. In the disability sector, AI is sort of the next groundbreaking technology that is honestly, it is an assistive technology, right? So in education where we work, students with disabilities are disproportionately higher users of AI tools and LLMs, and they're on the downside. They're also more likely to be disciplined in school settings for usage of those tools. But you'll hear a little bit about how I think the opportunities there and how we have to carefully foster innovation. So I'm going to jump in, and I think the best way to start is to start with a story. And so one of our users is his name is Brian Mirsma, and he has been actually a user of Bookshare, which is our core program that allows folks to actually access books in an accessible format. I'll talk about it in a second. For he's been using it for over 16 years. So Brian has severe dyslexia, and when he was a kid, it was hard for him in school, primarily because he was not provided with the tools to be able to read and learn content similar to others would, right? The printed text was hard. For someone who is blind, dyslexic, has cerebral palsy, all sorts of other sorts of things, it is really hard to use a printed book. In fact, 20% of us around the world and Americans have a hard time with printed books. But in Brian's story, Bookshare allowed him to read and read a lot. He read independently, he built confidence. He was able to excel in school as a result of that. And he graduated top of his class in a reading intensive major. And that's what surprises me. I have so many stories of people who actually, journalists, for example, that have dyslexia and obviously the job requires reading, but they use Bookshare and other tools that can actually enable them to do that. Brian is now a senior product manager at Microsoft, and he himself designs accessible technology. In fact, in the future, he'd be a better speaker at the summit than me. But I think that his story is amazing because it's a full circle, right? It's about how access to accessible tools and technology enabled him, and he is giving back and designing for a more accessible future. So this is sort of this is the sort of work that centers us. I think the best way to discuss AI and disability work and where we think we can play a role is to share a little bit about our story with AI, and then actually open up to how I think it would be helpful for other nonprofits to think about using AI. So really quickly, like I said, our flagship program is Bookshare. It's the world's largest library of accessible books. You can hear the book, you can change the typography of the book, you can have the words highlighted along with audio, you can put on a refreshable braille device, and we have over nearly 1.5 million books now in all sorts of languages and available in all sorts of ways. And it's free in the US to US students, and it's also free in low income countries. So uh, what we found out with 25 years of doing Bookshare is that we had really solved, we started doing this because there's a real problem. 90% of the world's content is inaccessible. Even the internet content, 90% of the internet content is inaccessible. And this is a huge, huge challenge that leads to very discrepant outcomes for those with disabilities. But as Bookshare helps solve for that with making books accessible through technology, we realized that the new manifestation of that is a few different problems. Number one is STEM, right? STEM jobs are growing dramatically. Where if you're interested in AI, you probably have some connection with STEM or would like to get into STEM. But guess what? Those with disabilities are severely underrepresented in STEM, and it's not because they don't want to or they can't, right? In fact, they have at school level they have the same interest in STEM careers as their peers, but less than a third of them compared to their peers actually end up in STEM jobs, and that's a huge, huge challenge because if we want AI solutions and AI tools to be inclusive in the future, we've got to have people with disabilities actually in those professions, in those companies that are building those tools. And so one of the challenges that we drill down on is that actually it's we the ecosystem of STEM content is very inaccessible. So imagine you open a math book, right? A math book has all these equations and diagrams, or a science book, right? And none of those, and imagine you're blind, equations that are diagrams, they're completely inaccessible, right? Maybe the text in a textbook you can hear through through speech and through text to speech, but images and there's actually no requirement for those to be made accessible. So it's expensive, so generally the publishing ecosystem doesn't really make those accessible, and this is a huge, huge challenge. So this is what leads to the biggest drop off. So the reason this is really expensive. Think about it, an average math book has thousands of equations. For someone to go in and try to figure out and make each of those accessible is very expensive. So here's what we thought. We thought we could actually use AI for that. And so a few years ago, we started actually building a large labeled data set of graphs that in an education space, working with publishers, and then training our models, running a competition, and then training models to actually make things like graphs, images of graphs or equations accessible in a way that you can actually put it in a markup language behind, so that as a consumer or user of the book, you can hear the content. You can really tab between parts of a fraction, right? And you can hear all pieces of this in a way that's actually meaningful and digestible. Same thing for graphs. You can actually convert it into tables and then navigate that, or get a description of that. So that's really exciting. We have since then had millions of math equations that we made accessible in books and Bookshare. We are seeing, last year, we actually saw that there was the largest growth in reading on Bookshare was in STEM content. There was a 16% growth in STEM content usage, and that is really, really encouraging to see that those with disabilities, if content is made more accessible, they are actually going to consume it more. So that's our start of our journey with using AI. And then we realized that, look, that's a part of the problem, because books are a part of how we learn today, but books are not the only type of materials available, right? It's not back in the day when, I would carry my textbooks in a backpack to school. People are on their computers. It's, teachers are getting all sorts of content. They're pulling stuff from the internet. And that has actually led to quite a bit of inaccessibility inadvertently. And this is where we've got to be careful. I think when we often design solutions, we don't realize that sometimes inadvertently it actually goes in the other direction when it comes to inclusion and accessibility. So to solve for that problem, we actually began to turning to LLMs, right? And saying that, look, we have pieces of remediation that we can do using AI. Can we also now take any piece of content and that's used in a classroom and try to make it as accessible as possible with AI? And that's something that we've just rolled out in some test cases in which you can honestly like take a picture of an assignment you get, of a worksheet you get, or you can upload it, or you can connect your LMS to it and pull it and make it accessible and read it just like any other book. So we're very excited about that. And it doesn't really stop there. I think there's some examples I'm showing on the screen of like how here's a scan of a textbook page and it's immediately made accessible that you can read just like you would read a book on Bookshare. Or an example of a worksheet, the math worksheet. My kids get math worksheets all the time that are in print form, and there's no actually, I don't even have a digital way of getting those. So be able to even take a picture of that and make it accessible on the fly. Those are the sorts of modalities that actually AI enables us to have, and to ensure that everyone can participate at the same time. And then the last thing I will share is, rethinking what even accessibility means, right? I mean, I think a lot of people think about accessibility as being able to navigate a website through, text to speech, or having a screen readable, and that's all really, really important. But when we started showing folks how we were making math more accessible, a parent of a student with disability came to me. I was like, well, it would be really great if this could actually be in a form simplified, this complex content, so that it would be easier for their student to understand it. And so the next, really the next thing that we've been working on is what we call a reading companion. But just imagine if you're in a textbook and it's super convoluted. If I'm reading a research paper and it's convoluted, or it could be helpful for anyone, particularly someone with a disability, to be able to simplify that content or interact in a way that actually enables those with disabilities to comprehend in a simplified manner, is I think also opens up doors, so that you can actually consume content and learn faster. So I'm excited about all of these. Affordances, this has actually led to a new product that we are launching and is being piloted in a whole bunch of school districts this fall. So AI is really, we've really gone from trying to make content accessible to all sorts of technologies, to now really using AI in all sorts of ways to make accessibility even more feasible in schools and in education settings. But I'm going to stop over here, right? This is all of this to share is that ours is an example of an org that's focused on serving disabilities and how AI can really enable, and innovation and support for AI can really transform what the solution space might look like. But what we really, as you all think about where AI can be used, there's a few lessons from our work, right? So one is, it's everyone knows in the disability space, nothing about us without us. You've got to have people with disabilities involved in these projects. So I encourage you, if you're thinking about anything to do with inclusion, go ahead and bring people on the team. We have blind engineers on our team. We have an inclusion team that's actually centers us as an organization, and that's how we work. Secondly, if you thought privacy and security is important in most discussions, it is even more important when we talk about disabilities. Knowing someone's disability status is very sensitive information, and how do we appropriately deal with that is something we have to be very mindful of. There's obviously tremendous positives that can come from knowing that, but I think we've got to be able to handle that carefully. The third thing I think everyone knows is that the algorithms and the models are based on what you feed in, and there's a dearth of disability representative information, and that manifests in all sorts of different ways. I was speaking to someone who has been working on policy work in driverless cars, and they spoke to me a couple years ago about how every model has cars running over handicapped people because there was not enough data fed in for training them, or all sorts of other ridiculous things that you would if you just thought for a moment, you would be shocked to see. So I think we've got to make sure that as we build things, that we really audit and make sure that the algorithms don't have biases built in. And then the last thing is, demand accessibility, right? Build accessibility from the start. Whenever you're thinking of a solution, we use the word born accessible in the education world. We try to make sure that if content is born accessible, if books are born accessible, we would never have this problem. They would be inclusive by design, and that's what it is about. How do you make things inclusive by design? So here, in the next few minutes, I want to leave you all with some ways of thinking about how you can use AI in your work, right? um, our inclusion team basically thinks of AI as your inclusion assistant, right? And particularly, I'll be now referring to things like ChatGPT and Gemini and all these different Claude, all these LLMs out there that you can easily get in the tip of your fingers. People think of those as assistants to do all sorts of things, but think of them as your AI assistant, right? You don't need to be an AI expert, you don't need to be an inclusion expert, but if you're interested in making sure that whatever you do can be more inclusive and accessible, you can actually do that now with AI. In our example, it's really time consuming for a teacher to make content accessible. But if they can use AI to make it accessible, they just have to, it saves them a lot of time, and they actually have the tools to do that. It's about the same thing, right? So for example, I'll give you some examples that might help you think about what this might mean for your work, right? So say you're building some content for social media or a newsletter, and there are images. It's really easy to put these images into something like ChatGPT or Gemini and use a prompt to describe it, right? And that would give you an alt text description that you can embed in images. A lot of tools like Microsoft PowerPoint and all already have those embedded in there that you can actually auto generate. But you can use it to describe it in a way that makes more sense. You can say make the description more vivid, or or provide some more context. So that's a simple thing that actually really opens up images and things of that nature. Similar to one other example I had given, if something is full of jargon, and God, we have a lot of work that nonprofits do are full of jargon, particularly in tech, right? Asking an LLM to rewrite it so that it's in a more simpler language is, I think, that's really helpful and meaningful. Simple things like this, right? Or like here, we have closed captions built into this tool. Closed captions are built into most of the virtual meeting tools. Being able to use that uses AI, that actually makes things more inclusive. Or to me, I if you're organizing a workshop, right? And we do a lot of this in the nonprofit space. Workshops are often not very inclusive of the different modalities that different people who are neurodiverse and have disabilities to use. So a really simple thing to do is to put in your workshop concept or agenda or plan or activity into this and into an LM master to make it more inclusive and accessible. I think that those are some really simple, like tangible things that you can do to on a day-to-day basis. But there are other things you can think about, like you've spoken to nonprofits who have asked us, how do you make the application process more inclusive for grantees? And that's another great example of how I think the LLM tools can be useful in making sure that the application has different modalities and is open to those with disabilities. So those are just a few examples of having like an assistant on your fingertips. There are so many tools out there, folks, that you can use. Just to give you some examples, you don't even need to pay a lot of subscriptions. There are open source tools run by Daisy that allow you to convert all these, can convert documents into accessible outputs. You have apps such as Seeing AI by Microsoft that basically allows you to take image-based content and describe it and make it more accessible. It's for those with, for example, who are blind, using AI as a way to actually just show the phone around and it describes them to things. But you can use it to even upload content and make it more accessible, such as printed materials. And this obviously is a whole future with sort of voice assistants and agents that can allow for accessibility, all using AI. So if you have any questions about these sorts of tools, feel free to reach out to us after. We're happy to share more information. We also have a campaign that we are running called All In, which is with all all sorts of partners to really raise awareness about accessibility and how AI and other tools can actually enable more inclusion. So feel free to follow on social media or just ping us and we can connect you with more information. Hope this leaves you with a few things to think about. I am happy to take questions and I will pause over here.
Hello. Thank you so much, Ayan. That was a fabulous session. And I think you covered so many things that are so core to everything we do around responsible and beneficial AI. And I loved your emphasis on how organizations can take practical actions, how there's tools that are open source and available. I think all of these things also make AI more accessible for all of us. So there were some fabulous questions in the Q&A. And one of them that I think really stood out from Nicole was, for nonprofits serving people with disabilities, how can we frame AI adoption in a way that highlights equity and inclusion rather than creating fear or skepticism among donors and stakeholders? What are your thoughts?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, and so why would it create fear? Sorry, I'm looking at the bottom part of the, oh, here it is, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I mean, inclusion is something that should not create skepticism or fear among anyone, right? And I understand we might be saying that in given the times that we live in, and that's a fair question. But look, the truth is, if we enable people to be and perform their best, we are helping everyone, right? So even if you look at the work that we do, a book being accessible and a student with a disability getting access to an accessible book actually not only helps that student who has a disability, but helps the entire classroom because the classroom can move along further at the same at a faster pace. And there's so much of science around how sort of universal design in can actually enable and benefit everyone. And there's tremendous benefits socioeconomically that comes around from inclusion of those with disabilities. The other flip side is, we're talking about 20% of humanity. It's not a small number. We can't just shut off and be like, we'll just maximize the rest, right? So from any perspective, and also folks also don't realize that sometimes that disabilities goes as is not really seriously looked at as a space for serious investment, right? I mean, there's a lot of charitable giving that happens in the disability space, but in a lot of true nonprofit work, if you look at, for instance, from an education's perspective, the scores of students with this of all types, you'll see that if you look by race, by gender, and by disability, the disability performance is way worse. So that's all of this to share is that it benefits us and behooves us all to think about and inclusion and disability in all our work, and it's not one of those things that I think of as partisan or even anything someone should fear or be skeptical about.
I completely agree. And that actually takes me to a question that I had a little bit and looking at some sessions earlier that we had about donor perceptions and here again, avoiding fear and skepticism, but were there ways in which you were able to use AI, in a way that assuaged donors' concerns? Or how did you go about kind of introducing, hey, we're using these new tools to amplify what we're doing? What did that conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I think it's a great question. That's really exciting. I think that a lot of, for example, we started working with some education funders recently, and they had not made any investments in AI. So we were actually one of their first sort of gateway investments into AI, and the conversation really was about, look, and they'd actually not even made any technology investment. So for them, investing in AI, they understood that AI could be a real game changer when it came to opening doors. And for them, when they heard about the use case of AI and accessibility and AI and inclusion, they realized that there's already such an existing gap that AI can really. There's all this evidence of how AI can really reduce it. I think they felt compelled in some ways to try out, right? I mean, a lot of this thing is trial and error, right? I think we have to also not fool ourselves, right? I think a lot of the solutions with any tech, we got to try and see if this works out and it helps. If not, we adapt. And I think that if there's a good case to be made, and I think there's a solid case to be made with AI and inclusion, I think we see even funders who will be reticent in normal ways to think about it differently. And I think that's what's really, really interesting. And there are many use cases here from all sorts of things, but I think this is a, just I think describing the power of what is feasible, being while being realistic, I think is a way to sort of open up some of these conversations about how AI can be used in inclusion.
I love that. Thank you. I think sometimes we feel some hesitance, to bring these things up and to share kind of what we're thinking or what might be possible. And it sounds like there's actually a lot of excitement and momentum that can be built around that when you bring people along for that journey. Incredible. Well,
Thanks.
thanks, Ayan. I think we are at time today. So I just want to thank you again for taking your time to join us, share your expertise, share those awesome examples from your experience at Benetech. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I'm happy to stick on, I think, in the launch or something to take questions if folks would like. Um, but anyways, I've enjoyed the session. You know where to find me. Look me up on LinkedIn, add me. Happy to have a chat.
Amazing. Thanks, Ayan. All right. We're going to take a second to ask what you thought of the session. So, you may have already given feedback on some other sessions, and we'd love to hear from you on Accessible by Design. What did you learn? What did you want to learn more about? Share your feedback. That helps us inform our speakers and also helps us inform the design of next year's Fundraising AI Global Summit and what that looks like and how we can constantly address questions that you might have or dive deeper into topics that might be most interesting to you. So, we'd love to hear from you. Coming up next, we have another slew of amazing sessions. On the Amplify stage, Ria Wong is going over custom GPTs and agentic AI workflows. On this stage, we're going to be moving into privacy in the age of AI. How do we protect our donors and data? So, a critical part of us building and maintaining trust with donors. We're going to cover that with Steve. And then on the impact stage, we are moving into moving up the grid, how nonprofits can unlock greater efficiency and better results with the fantastic Eric Tamales. So, some really fantastic sessions here. I should note that the Ria Wong's session is CFRE eligible or qualifies for the CFRE credit. So, if you're interested in that professional development credit, make sure you check out the tracker here. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to link us back to navigate through the schedule for your next session. Just you can pop into that top right schedule button, open that up, and that'll go ahead and show you everything that's coming up. And you can go ahead and jump from there into your next session. So that's all we have right now. We'll see you in the next session, and we'll hopefully see you back here on the innovation stage.